Four Noble Truths. Understanding Suffering Dukkha. Part 1. The First Noble Truth, the foundation of Buddhist wisdom. 1. The central place of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism. Among all teachings attributed to the Buddha, none is more fundamental, comprehensive, and enduring than the Four Noble Truths Katari Ariasakani. From the earliest strata of Buddhist texts to later Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions, the Four Noble Truths remain the core framework through which the Buddha's path to liberation is understood. The Buddha himself emphasized their centrality when he declared that his teaching concerns only two things: suffering and end of suffering. This statement reveals a crucial fact about Buddhism. It is not a speculative philosophy, a metaphysical system, or a theology centered on divine authority. Instead, Buddhism is a pragmatic path of liberation, grounded in direct observation of human experience. The Four Noble Truths are: the truth of suffering Dukkha, the truth of the origin of suffering Samudaya, the truth of the cessation of suffering Nirodha, the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering Magga. Among these four, a first noble truth, suffering, serves as the foundation. Without a clear and honest understanding of suffering, the remaining truths lose their transformative power. One cannot meaningfully investigate the cause of suffering, believe in its cessation, or walk the path leading beyond it without first recognizing suffering as it truly is too. Why the Buddha began with suffering. At first glance, beginning a spiritual teaching with suffering may appear pessimistic or even discouraging. Many religious and philosophical traditions begin by offering hope, happiness, salvation, or divine reassurance. The Buddha, however, shows a radically different approach. He began with reality. Human beings instinctively avoid suffering. We distract ourselves with pleasure, achievement, relationships, beliefs, and ideals. We prefer comforting narratives over uncomfortable. Yet the Buddha understood that denial of suffering is itself a cause of suffering. Just as a physician must first diagnose an illness before prescribing treatment, the Buddha diagnosed the fundamental condition of human existence. The First Noble Truth is not a judgment about life, but an accurate description of lived experience. By starting with suffering, the Buddha invites us to stop running, stop pretending, and look directly at what is actually happening in our lives. 3. The meaning of dukkha, beyond pain and misery. A common misunderstanding arises when the First Noble Truth is translated simply as life is suffering. While this phrase captures an aspect of the teaching, it fails to convey the full depth of the Pali term dukkha. Dukkha does not refer only to pain, sorrow, or misery. Its meaning is far broader and more subtle. It includes unsatisfactory, incompleteness, instability, insecurity, the inability of conditioned phenomena to provide lasting peace. In this sense, Dukkha describes the structural fragility of all conditioned existence. Anything that arises due to causes and conditions is inherently unstable and therefore incapable of providing permanent fulfillment. Pleasure is dukkha because it fades. Success is dukkha because it must be maintained. Love is dukkha because it carries fear of loss. Thus, suffering in Buddhism is not merely emotional pain, it is the existential condition of relying on what cannot truly satisfy. 4. The three levels of suffering. To clarify the nature of dukkha, Buddhist teachings traditionally describe three levels of suffering, moving from obvious to subtle. 4.1. Dukkha dukkha, ordinary suffering. This is the most visible form of suffering and includes birth, aging, illness, and death, physical pain and discomfort, grief, fear, anxiety, and despair, separation from what is loved, association with what is disliked. This form of suffering is universally acknowledged and requires little philosophical explanation. 4. VIPRI letter 147 Amacron Emma Dukkha, suffering due to change. More subtle is the suffering that arises from impermanence. Pleasant experiences inevitably change, fade, or turn into their opposites. The suffering here does not arise because something is painful, but because something pleasant does not last. This explains why people who are wealthy, successful, or admired can still experience deep dissatisfaction. When happiness depends on conditions, this loss is unavoidable. 4.3. As a letter 145 Ka Shimakron are a dukkha, suffering inherent in conditioned existence. The deepest and most subtle level of suffering lies in the very fact of being a conditioned process. Even in the absence of pain or loss, there is an underlying tension in having to continuously maintain a sense of self, identity, and control. This level of suffering is rarely recognized without deep contemplation, yet it is the most pervasive. It reveals that suffering isn't merely something that happens to us, it is embedded in the way we exist when driven by ignorance. 5. Birth is suffering, a profound but misunderstood statement. One of the most frequently misunderstood statements in Buddhism is the declaration that birth is suffering. This is often interpreted as nihilistic or life-denying. However, such interpretations miss the Buddha's intention. The Buddha did not claim that life has no value. Rather, he pointed out that birth initiates the entire cycle of vulnerability. To be born is to become subject to aging, illness, death, and loss. Birth provides the conditions for suffering to arise not as punishment, but as natural consequence. Understanding this truth encourages wisdom, not despair. 6. Suffering in the modern world. Modern society has alleviated many forms of physical suffering, yet psychological and existential suffering has increased dramatically. Anxiety, depression, loneliness, and loss of meaning have become widespread. This reveals a critical insight of the first noble truth. Suffering is not eliminated by comfort, technology, or consumption. It persists because it originates not in external conditions but in the way you relate to experience. Modern suffering often manifests as chronic dissatisfaction, identity confusion, fear of insignificance, constant comparison, inner emptiness. These forms of suffering align precisely with the Buddha's analysis of dukkha. 7. Understanding suffering as the beginning of liberation. The first noble truth is not meant to induce hopelessness. On the contrary, it is the starting point of freedom. Only by clearly seeing suffering can one begin to understand its causes and discover the path beyond it. In Buddhist practice, suffering is not something to be hated or avoided. It is something to be understood. This understanding transforms suffering from an enemy to a teacher. The first noble truth calls us to radical honesty. It asks us to stop looking away and to acknowledge the limitations of conditioned existence. In doing so, it lays the groundwork for genuine liberation. Without understanding suffering, spiritual practice becomes escapism. With understanding, it becomes a path of wisdom and freedom. Part 2. The deeper dimensions of suffering in Buddhist thought. 1. Moving beyond a superficial understanding of suffering. In Part 1, we explored the first noble truth as the foundation of Buddhist wisdom. We saw that suffering dukkha is not limited to pain or misfortune, but refers to the fundamental unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence. In this second part, we move deeper into the Buddha's analysis by examining how suffering operates beneath the surface of everyday experience. Many people believe they understand suffering simply because they have suffered. Yet the Buddha made a critical distinction between experiencing suffering and understanding suffering. One can live an entire lifetime in pain without ever comprehending its nature. Buddhist wisdom begins not with emotional reaction, but with clear seeing. The purpose of this deeper inquiry is not intellectual sophistication. it is liberation. The more precisely suffering is understood, the less power it has over the mind. 2. Suffering as a structural feature of conditioned reality. One of the most radical insights of Buddhism is that suffering is not accidental. It is not the result of personal failure, moral weakness, or cosmic injustice. Rather, suffering is a structural feature of conditioned existence. Anything that arises due to causes and conditions as a letter 145 kh a dhamma is subject to three universal characteristics: impermanence anicca, unsatisfactoriness dukkha, non-self anatta. These three characteristics are not separate teachings but different perspectives on the same reality. Impermanence leads to unsatisfactoriness, and unsatisfactoriness reveals the absence of a permanent self. Because all conditioned phenomena arise and pass away, they cannot provide stable refuge. When the mind seeks permanence, certainty, or identity in what is inherently unstable, suffering arises. 3. The relationship between impermanence and suffering. Impermanence anicca is often taught as a neutral observation. Everything changes. However, in lived experience, impermanence becomes suffering when it collides with attachment. The Buddha did not teach that impermanence itself is suffering. Change is simply change. Suffering arises when the mind demands that what changes should remain the same. This demand manifests in countless ways. Wanting youth to last, wanting relationships to remain unchanged, wanting success to be permanent, wanting pleasant emotions to continue. When reality fails to conform to these expectations, it inevitably must suffering arises. Thus, suffering is not caused by impermanence alone, but by the refusal to accept impermanence. 4. Pleasure as a hidden source of suffering. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of Buddhist teaching is the assertion that pleasure itself is a form of suffering. This does not mean that pleasure is bad or immoral. It means that pleasure is unreliable as a foundation for happiness. Pleasure becomes suffering in three primary ways. Dependence happiness becomes conditional. Fear of loss anxiety arises alongside enjoyment. Craving for repetition dissatisfaction follows pleasure. Even the most refined pleasure as art, love, achievement, spiritual experiences carry these risks. The more intense the pleasure, the stronger the attachment, and the deeper the suffering when conditions change. This insight explains why societies that maximize pleasure do not eliminate suffering. They often intensify. 5. Identity, self, and existential suffering. At the heart of Buddhist analysis lies a profound insight. Much of human suffering arises from clinging to a sense of self. We suffer not only because things change, but because we believe there is someone who should be in control. This belief gives rise to existential suffering, including fear of meaninglessness, anxiety about identity, obsession with recognition, resistance to aging and death. The Buddha observed that the self we defend so fiercely is not a stable entity, but a dynamic process composed of physical and mental aggregates contests. When this process is mistaken for a permanent self, suffering becomes inevitable. Existential suffering intensifies when individuals feel they must be someone or become something in order to justify their existence. 6. The 5 aggregates as the field of suffering. The Buddha described human experience as consisting of 5 aggregates. Form rupa the body, feeling vedana pleasant, unpleasant, neutral sensations. Perception sanina recognition and labeling. Mental formations as a letter 145 kh are intentions, habits, reactions. Consciousness vi in tilde amacron letter 147 awareness. Each aggregate is impermanent, conditioned, and not self. Yet we cling to them as me or mine. This clinging transforms ordinary experience into suffering. For example, clinging to the body leads to fear of illness and aging. Clinging to feelings leads to chasing pleasure and resisting pain. Clinging to thoughts leads to anxiety and rumination. Understanding suffering requires seeing how attachment operates within these aggregates moment by moment. 7. Ordinary suffering and subtle suffering. The Buddhist teaching distinguishes between obvious suffering and subtle suffering. Ordinary suffering includes pain, loss, grief, and disappointment. Subtle suffering, however, operates beneath awareness as restlessness, dissatisfaction without clear cause, a sense of incompleteness, background anxiety. Modern psychology often encounters this subtle suffering in the form of chronic stress or existential unease. Buddhism recognizes it as the natural consequence of conditioned existence driven by ignorance. Subtle suffering is more difficult to recognize precisely because it has become normalized. People often believe it is simply how life is, rather than something that can be understood and transcended. 8. Collective and social dimensions of suffering. Although Buddhism emphasizes individual insight, it does not ignore the collective dimensions of suffering. Social structures driven by greed, competition, and ignorance amplify individual suffering. Examples include economic systems based on endless growth, social identities built on comparison, cultural narratives equating worth with productivity. These systems reinforce craving and fear, creating environments where dissatisfaction becomes widespread. While Buddhism teaches personal liberation, it also offers tools for understanding how suffering is collectively produced and sustained. Understanding suffering, therefore, is not a withdrawal from the world, but a clearer engagement with it. 9. Why suffering persists even when life improves. A crucial insight of the First Noble Truth is that suffering does not disappear when conditions improve. This explains why individuals who achieve wealth, status, or security often report continued dissatisfaction. Improved conditions reduce certain forms of pain, but they do not address attachment, identity fixation, fear of impermanence. Without wisdom, improved conditions often intensify craving, making suffering more refined but no less real. 10. Understanding suffering as a skillful practice. In Buddhism, suffering is not something to be rejected, but something to be understood deeply. Parinaya. This understanding is an active practice involving mindfulness, investigation, and patience. When suffering is observed without resistance, it reveals its impermanent nature. Its grip weakens. Insight arises naturally. This approach contrasts sharply with avoidance strategies that seek to numb, distract, or suppress suffering. Such strategies may offer temporary relief but ultimately strengthen suffering's underlying causes. 11. The ethical dimension of understanding suffering. Understanding suffering has ethical implications. When one truly sees how suffering arises, compassion naturally develops. One recognizes that others are not acting out of malice, but out of confusion and craving. This insight forms the moral foundation of Buddhist ethics. Non-harming, patience, kindness, responsibility. Ethical conduct in Buddhism is not based on commandment, but on understanding the mechanics of suffering. Part 2 deepens our understanding of suffering by revealing its subtle, structural, and existential dimensions. Suffering is not merely an unfortunate aspect of life. It is the predictable outcome of clinging to what is impermanent, unstable, and not self. This understanding prepares the ground for the next stages of the path. Only when suffering is seen clearly can its causes be addressed effectively. In the next part, we will explore how suffering is inseparable from impermanence and non-self, and how insight into these truths transforms our relationship with experience. Part 3. Suffering, Impermanence, and Non-Self. 1. From understanding suffering to penetrating reality. In the previous parts, we examined suffering as the foundational truth of Buddhist wisdom and explored its deeper psychological, existential, and structural dimensions. We now arrive at a crucial turning point in the Buddha's teaching. Suffering cannot be fully understood in isolation. It must be seen in direct relationship with two other universal characteristics of existence: impermanence anicca and non-self anatta. The Buddha did not present these teachings as abstract metaphysical principles. Rather, they function as lenses through which suffering becomes intelligible. Without understanding impermanence and non-self, suffering appears arbitrary, unfair, or tragic. With understanding, suffering reveals itself as lawful, conditioned, and therefore transformable. This part explores how suffering arises precisely because we misunderstand impermanence and cling to a sense of self where none can be found. 2. Impermanence anicca, the unavoidable nature of change. Impermanence is one of the most frequently cited teachings of Buddhism, yet it is also one of the most superficially understood. At an intellectual level, most people readily accept that everything changes. However, existential acceptance of impermanence is far more difficult. Impermanence means more than occasional change. It means that all conditioned phenomena are in a constant process of arising and passing away, moment by moment. Nothing remains static long enough to serve as a permanent foundation for security or identity. This applies equally to physical forms, sensations and emotion, thoughts and beliefs, relationships and social structure, entire civilizations. From a Buddhist perspective, impermanence is not a flaw in reality, it is reality itself. 3. Why impermanence becomes suffering. If impermanence is simply how things are, why does it cause suffering? The Buddha's insight was precise. Impermanence causes suffering only when met with attachment. Suffering arises when the mind demands permanence from what cannot provide it. This demand often operates unconsciously and manifests as resistance to aging, fear of death, clinging to identity, anxiety about change, grief over loss. We do not suffer merely because things change. We suffer because we want them not to change. Thus, suffering emerges not from impermanence itself, but from the misalignment between reality and expectation. 4. Emotional suffering and the refusal of change. Much emotional suffering can be traced to a refusal, often subtle and habitual, to accept change. When relationships evolve, roles shift, or circumstances alter, the mind reacts with resistance. This resistance may appear as anger, this should not be happening; sadness, I want things back the way they were; fear, I don't know who I'll be now. The Buddha did not teach emotional suppression. Rather, he taught clear seeing. Emotions themselves are impermanent processes. When emotions are observed without clinging, they arise and pass naturally, without crystallizing into suffering. 5. The illusion of control and the birth of anxiety. A major source of suffering lies in the illusion that life should be controllable. Modern societies often reinforce this illusion through narratives of mastery, optimization, and personal agency. That impermanence undermines the fantasy of total control. Bodies age, minds change, external conditions shift unpredictably. When control is assumed where none exists, anxiety becomes inevitable. From a Buddhist perspective, anxiety is not a personal failure. It is the psychological expression of clinging in an impermanent world. 6. Non-self anatta, the most radical insight. If impermanence explains why things cannot satisfy, non-self explains why there is no one who can ultimately possess them. The Buddhist teaching of non-self anatta is often misunderstood as nihilistic. In reality, it is a profound insight into the nature of experience. The Buddha did not deny the functional existence of persons. He denied the existence of a permanent, independent, unchanging self within experience. What we call self is a dynamic process, not a fixed entity. 7. The 5 aggregates and the construction of self. The Buddha analyzed experience into 5 aggregates khandhas: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These aggregates function together to create the illusion of a unified self. However, upon examination, none of them is stable, autonomous, or permanent. Suffering arises when these aggregates are appropriated as, "This is me. This is mine. This is who I am." When identity is constructed on impermanent processes, instability becomes unavoidable. 8. Identity clinging and existential suffering. Modern existential suffering often revolves around questions of identity. Who am I? Am I enough? What is my purpose? From a Buddhist standpoint, these questions themselves presuppose a stable self that must be defined or fulfilled. The struggle to maintain a coherent identity in a changing world generates chronic tension. Non-self does not eliminate meaning. It liberates experience from the burden of self-definition. When identity is loosened, life is no longer a project that must be justified. 9. Suffering without a sufferer. One of the most liberating implications of non-self is the realization that suffering can exist without a permanent sufferer. Pain occurs, emotions arise, thoughts appear, but none of these require an enduring owner. This insight radically transforms one's relationship with suffering. Instead of "I am suffering," there is simply "suffering is present." This subtle shift weakens identification and allows suffering to pass without being amplified. 10. Impermanence, non-self, and the end of fear. Fear thrives on permanence. Fear of losing what we have, fear of becoming what we dislike, fear of ceasing to exist as we imagine ourselves. When impermanence and non-self are deeply understood, fear loses its foundation. This does not produce indifference. It produces equanimity, capacity to meet change without panic and loss without collapse. 11. Insight as a lived experience, not a belief. The Buddha repeatedly emphasized that impermanence and non-self must be directly seen, not merely accepted intellectually. Insight arises through mindful observation of experience as it unfolds. In meditation, one observes sensations arising and passing, thoughts appearing and dissolving, emotions forming and fading. Through this observation, impermanence and non-self cease to be concepts and become lived realities. With this shift, suffering diminishes naturally. 12. Why these insights are essential for liberation. Without understanding impermanence, one continues to chase stability where none exists. Without understanding non-self, one continues to defend an identity that cannot be secured. Together, impermanence and non-self dismantle the root conditions of suffering. They prepare the mind to understand the second noble truth, the origin of suffering, and make possible the realization of the third, the cessation of suffering. Suffering, impermanence, and non-self are not separate teachings, but different expressions of the same truth. To see one clearly is to begin seeing the others. Suffering arises because we cling. We cling because we misunderstand impermanence. We misunderstand impermanence because we believe in a self that must be protected. When this chain is broken through insight, suffering loses its grip. In the next part, we will examine how this understanding applies to modern life, and how subtle forms of suffering are perpetuated in contemporary society. Part 4. Modern life and the subtle forms of dukkha. 1. Has modern life reduced suffering? At first glance, modern life appears far removed from the harsh realities of the ancient world in which the Buddha lived. Advances in medicine, technology, transportation, and communication have significantly reduced many forms of physical hardship. Life expectancy has increased, comfort has expanded, and access to information has become nearly unlimited. Yet despite these advances, contemporary societies face an unprecedented rise in anxiety disorders, depression, burnout, loneliness, existential confusion. This paradox raises a profound question. If suffering is caused primarily by external hardship, why does it persist and, even intensify when conditions improve? The Buddha's analysis of suffering offers a compelling answer. Suffering is not eliminated by better conditions because its roots lie not in circumstances, but in the mind's relationship to experience. 2. The shift from gross suffering to subtle suffering. In traditional Buddhist analysis, suffering evolves from gross obvious forms to subtle refined forms as conditions improve. When survival is threatened, suffering manifests as hunger, disease, and violence. When survival is secured, suffering does not disappear, it becomes psychological and existential. Modern suffering often lacks a clear external cause. People report feeling dissatisfied for no reason, restless without knowing why, or empty despite outward success. This is a textbook manifestation of a letter 145 kh emacron or a dukkha, the suffering inherent in conditioned existence. Because subtle suffering is less dramatic, it is often normalized or ignored. People assume it is simply part of being human. Buddhism challenges this assumption by asserting that even subtle suffering has causes and therefore can cease. 3. Speed, distraction, and the loss of presence. One defining feature of modern life is speed. Information moves instantly, tasks multiply, attention is constantly fragmented. While speed increases efficiency, it also undermines presence, a quality essential for understanding suffering. When the mind is perpetually distracted, emotional states go unexamined. Craving operates unchecked. Dissatisfaction accumulates unnoticed. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness sati precisely because suffering often arises below the threshold of conscious awareness. Without slowing down and paying attention, subtle forms of dukkha remain invisible yet influential. 4. Consumer culture and the manufacture of dissatisfaction. Modern economies are largely driven by consumption. Advertising and social narratives continuously suggest that happiness lies just beyond the next purchase, upgrade, or achievement. This culture systematically cultivates craving for novelty, dissatisfaction with the present, comparison with others. From a Buddhist perspective, consumer culture institutionalizes Tia letter 147 H emacron craving. It trains the mind to seek fulfillment externally while ignoring the impermanent nature of all acquisitions. As a result, even abundance fails to satisfy. The mind becomes conditioned to dissatisfaction, ensuring that suffering continues regardless of material success. 5. Identity in the age of comparison. Social media and digital platforms have transformed identity into a public performance. Individuals curate images of themselves and constantly compare their lives to idealized representations of others. This environment intensifies self-judgment, fear of inadequacy, anxiety about belonging. Buddhist teachings on non-self reveal why this is so painful. When identity is constructed around impermanent attributes appearance, status, approval, it becomes inherently unstable. The more tightly one clings to identity, the more vulnerable one becomes to suffering. 6. Productivity, worth, and existential pressure. Modern societies often equate personal worth with productivity. Being busy is praised. Stillness is viewed as unproductive. Rest is often accompanied by guilt. This creates a form of existential suffering in which individuals feel they must constantly justify their existence through achievement. Failure to meet internalized standards leads to shame, while success brings only temporary relief. The Buddhist teaching undermines this entire framework by showing that being is not something that must be earned. Suffering arises when existence is treated as a problem to be solved rather than a process to be understood. 7. Loneliness and the illusion of connection. Despite unprecedented connectivity, loneliness has become a defining feature of modern life. Digital communication often lacks the depth and presence required for genuine connection. Buddhism does not attribute loneliness solely to external isolation. It points to a deeper cause, the sense of separation created by self-clinging. When experience is filtered through a rigid sense of me and mine, connection becomes conditional and fragile. Understanding non-self loosens this rigidity, allowing for connection without possession and intimacy without fear. 8. Anxiety as a modern expression of impermanence. Anxiety has become one of the most prevalent forms of modern suffering. At its core, anxiety reflects resistance to uncertainty. It is the mind's attempt to secure permanence in an impermanent world. From a Buddhist perspective, anxiety is not irrational. It is a predictable response to clinging in conditions of rapid change. When impermanence accelerates as it does in modern life, anxiety intensifies. The solution is not increased control, but increased understanding. Acceptance of impermanence reduces the mental friction that gives rise to anxiety. 9. The medicalization of suffering. Modern societies often approach suffering as a pathology to be eliminated. While medical and psychological interventions are valuable, they can unintentionally obscure deeper existential dimensions of dukkha. Buddhism does not deny the importance of treatment. However, it insists that not all suffering is a disorder. Some suffering arises naturally from misunderstanding reality and requires wisdom rather than medication. Ignoring this distinction risks treating symptoms while leaving causes untouched. 10. The role of mindfulness in revealing subtle dukkha. Mindfulness practice plays a crucial role in exposing subtle suffering. By observing experience moment by moment, practitioners begin to notice background dissatisfaction, habitual resistance, automatic craving. This awareness is not meant to amplify suffering, but to bring it into the light of understanding. What is seen clearly loses its power to dominate. 11. Compassion in a suffering world. Understanding modern suffering naturally gives rise to compassion. When one sees how deeply conditioned dissatisfaction is, blame gives way to empathy. This compassion is not sentimental. It is grounded in insight into the shared human condition. It recognizes that harmful behaviors often arise not from malice, but from confusion and craving. 12. Why modern life makes the Buddhist teaching more relevant. Far from being outdated, the Buddha's analysis of suffering speaks directly to the challenges of modern life. In an age of distraction, comparison, and constant change, understanding dukkha becomes increasingly urgent. The first noble truth does not condemn modern life, illuminates it. Modern life has not eliminated suffering, it has refined it. Gross suffering has diminished in many places, but subtle suffering has proliferated. The Buddhist teaching provides the conceptual and practical tools needed to recognize and address these refined forms of dukkha. In the final part, we will explore why understanding suffering itself is liberating and how insight into dukkha transforms one's entire relationship with life. Part 5. Why understanding suffering is liberation. 1. Why the Buddha did not promise immediate happiness. One of the most striking aspects of the Buddhist teaching is what it does not promise. Unlike many spiritual traditions, Buddhism does not begin by offering happiness, bliss, or salvation. Instead, it begins with a demand for honesty, the willingness to look directly at suffering. This approach is not accidental. The Buddha understood that happiness pursued without understanding suffering becomes another form of suffering. When happiness is treated as an object to be acquired, it inevitably turns into craving. When craving is frustrated, it must be disappointment follows. Therefore, the Buddha did not teach how to avoid suffering. He taught how to understand it so completely that it loses its power. 2. The meaning of understanding in the First Noble Truth. In the First Noble Truth, the Buddha stated not only that suffering exists, but that it must be understood padinye. This word is crucial. It does not mean intellectual comprehension alone. It means direct, experiential insight. To understand suffering in the Buddhist sense is to observe it without resistance, to see its arising and passing, to recognize its causes, to stop identifying with it. This kind of understanding transforms suffering from something that happens to us into something that is simply known. 3. The shift from I suffer to suffering is present. One of the most liberating shifts in Buddhist practice is the movement from personal identification to impersonal awareness. Ordinarily, suffering is framed as, I am suffering, this should not be happening to me, something is wrong with my life. Through insight, this narrative dissolves. Suffering is no longer owned. It is seen as a conditioned process, arising and passing like all other phenomena. This shift may appear subtle, but its impact is profound. When suffering is no longer personalized, it loses much of its emotional weight. 4. Why resistance intensifies suffering. The Buddha observed that resistance is the hidden amplifier of suffering. Pain may be unavoidable, but suffering is multiplied by the mind's refusal to accept what is happening. Resistance takes many forms. Denial, blame, self-pity, anger at reality. When resistance is present, suffering becomes a struggle. When resistance ends, suffering begins to dissolve on its own. Understanding suffering means understanding resistance and letting it go. 5. Insight breaks the chain of dependent origination. Suffering is not random. Arises according to lawful conditions described in dependent origination. Pa-aka-samapada. Ignorance conditions craving, craving conditions clinging, clinging conditions becoming, becoming conditions suffering. Insight interrupts this chain. When suffering is clearly seen, craving weakens, clinging loosens, identification dissolves. This is why understanding suffering is not merely descriptive, it is causally effective. It changes what happens next. 6. The difference between suppression and liberation. Many people attempt to deal with suffering by suppressing it through distraction, pleasure, substances, or forced positivity. These strategies may offer temporary relief, but they leave the underlying mechanisms intact. Liberation, by contrast, involves allowing suffering to be fully known. What is fully known cannot dominate. What is seen clearly cannot deceive. The Buddha did not teach avoidance. He taught fearless awareness. 7. The paradox. Turning towards suffering reduces it from a conventional perspective. It seems counterintuitive that turning towards suffering would reduce it. Yet this paradox lies at the heart of Buddhist practice. When suffering is avoided, it grows in the shadows. When it is faced directly, it reveals its impermanent and conditioned nature. This is why meditation often brings difficult emotions to the surface. The purpose is not to increase suffering, but to end the habit of running from it. 8. Understanding suffering gives rise to compassion. When suffering is understood deeply, compassion arises naturally. One recognizes that others are also caught in patterns of craving, fear, and confusion. This compassion is not based on moral superiority or obligation. It arises from recognition of a shared condition. When suffering is no longer personalized, empathy replaces judgment. Thus, understanding suffering not only liberates the individual, it transforms relationships. 9. Freedom without escape. Buddhist liberation does not require withdrawing from the world. It requires withdrawing misunderstanding. A liberated person still experiences pleasure and pain, success and failure, praise and blame. The difference lies in the absence of clinging. Experiences arise and pass without leaving residue. This freedom is not dramatic. It's quiet, stable, and deeply grounded. 10. Why understanding is more powerful than control. Much of human effort is devoted to controlling experience. We attempt to control circumstances, emotions, outcomes, and even other people. That control is fragile in an impermanent world. Understanding, by contrast, does not depend on external stability. It depends only on clarity of awareness. When suffering is understood, it no longer requires control to be manageable. This is why Buddhist liberation is described as inner freedom, independent of conditions. 11. The end of the search for meaning elsewhere. Many forms of suffering arise from the belief that meaning must be found elsewhere in achievement, recognition, or transcendence. The Buddhist teaching reveals that this search itself is driven by dissatisfaction. When suffering is understood, the compulsive search for meaning relaxes. Life no longer needs to justify itself. Experience is sufficient as it is. This is not nihilism. It is intimacy with reality. 12. Understanding suffering and the end of fear. Fear depends on the belief that something essential can be lost. When impermanence and non-self are deeply understood, fear loses its foundation. This does not mean fear never arises. It means fear no longer controls behavior. It is seen, felt, and released. This is one of the clearest signs of liberation. 13. Liberation as a gradual unbinding. The Buddha described liberation as unbinding nibbana. This image suggests release rather than attainment. Nothing new is acquired. What is released is misunderstanding. Understanding suffering unties the knots of craving and identification. With each knot released, freedom increases. Liberation is not an event. It is a process of continual letting go. 14. The Four Noble Truths as a single insight. Although presented as four truths, the Buddha emphasized that they are deeply interconnected. To fully understand one is to begin understanding them all. Understanding suffering reveals its causes. Understanding its causes points to its cessation. Understanding cessation clarifies the path. Thus, the Four Noble Truths form a single insight view from different angles. Why the First Noble Truth is the gateway. The First Noble Truth is not depressing. It is liberating. It invites honesty, clarity, and courage. Without it, spiritual practice becomes fantasy. With it, practice becomes grounded and transformative. The Buddha did not ask us to believe in suffering. He asked us to look. When suffering is fully understood, it no longer binds. When it no longer binds, freedom is present. This is the heart of the Buddha's teaching.